The Mafia boss's father had not spoken in 11 years, until the Curvy Maid sang her name. Why did the maid's voice finally break 11 years of silence? And what was it about her name that made that moment possible? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. We are glad to have you here for another emotional story where unexpected connections can change everything. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thank you for continuing to watch, support, and share this journey with us. Your support means more than you know. And before we start, tell us in the comments, do you believe one unexpected person can reach someone after years of silence? Now, get comfortable, stay with us, and let us begin the story. Do not sing that song in this house. Mrs. Holloway said it so sharply that I stopped with a vase of white roses halfway to the library table. I had been working at the Sullivan estate for 6 days, long enough to learn that questions were discouraged and silence was practically part of the furniture. The mansion sat outside Chicago behind iron gates and acres of perfectly trimmed lawn, beautiful in the cold way museums were beautiful. Everything had a place. Everything had a rule. Especially Walter Sullivan. I had seen him only twice. 67 years old, silver-haired, always dressed neatly, always sitting near the same tall window overlooking the garden. Nobody had heard him speak in 11 years. That was what another maid whispered to me on my second morning, right before Mrs. Holloway warned us never to discuss the family. Walter was the father of Nathaniel Sullivan, the man whose name could lower voices across half the city. I had not met Nathaniel yet, and I was perfectly comfortable keeping it that way. My job was simple. Clean the rooms, change the flowers, collect my paycheck, go home. That Thursday evening, rain tapped softly against the library windows while I replaced wilted roses with fresh ones. I thought I was alone. Maybe that was why I started humming. It was an old melody my grandmother Evelyn used to sing while making Sunday dinner, back when our tiny kitchen smelled like cinnamon and coffee and nobody cared whether I sang off-key. I barely remembered all the words anymore. Only the ending. Sleep softly, Margaret, morning will come. A small metallic sound came from behind me. I turned. Walter Sullivan stood in the doorway. A silver teaspoon lay on the hardwood floor near his shoe. Mr. Sullivan? He did not move. His pale face had gone strangely still. His eyes were fixed on me with such intensity that I instinctively set the vase down. Are you all right? He took one slow step into the room, then another. I considered calling Mrs. Holloway, but something stopped me. Walter did not look frightened. He looked as if he were listening to a voice coming from very far away. His lips moved. No sound came. I held my breath. Would you like me to get someone? His hand tightened around the back of a chair. Then, in a voice rough from years of disuse, he whispered one word. Margaret. I forgot how to breathe. 11 years. That was what they had told me. 11 years without a single word. And now he had spoken because I sang a name from an old song. What did you say? I whispered. Walter looked directly into my eyes. Margaret. This time the name was clearer. Footsteps sounded in the hallway behind him. Slow. Controlled. Walter turned, and I followed his gaze. A tall man in a charcoal suit stood at the library entrance. Dark hair, pale skin, an expression so composed it made the room feel smaller. I did not need an introduction. Nathaniel Sullivan had finally come home. His eyes moved from his father to me, then to the fallen teaspoon on the floor. He spoke. I said before I could stop myself. Nathaniel did not look surprised. He looked suspicious. I heard him. His voice was quiet. What did you do? My stomach tightened. Nothing. My father has not spoken in 11 years. He stepped into the library. Then you arrive, sing one song, and suddenly he says her name. Walter stared at me again. Nathaniel noticed. His expression changed by barely a fraction. Who taught you that song? My grandmother. What was her name? I hesitated, suddenly aware that every person in the room was waiting for my answer. Evelyn. Carter. Walter inhaled sharply. His fingers trembled against the chair. Then he looked at me and whispered another name. Evelyn. Walter's second word changed the room more than the first. Margaret could have been coincidence. Evelyn could not. Nathaniel's eyes stayed on his father, but I could feel the question in the silence between us. Walter lowered himself into the leather chair beside the window as though those two names had exhausted him. I took one step toward him. Mr. Sullivan, are you feeling all right? Nathaniel moved between us before I reached the chair. He did not touch me. He did not need to. Give him space. I was trying to help. You have helped enough for one evening. His tone was controlled, almost polite, but I heard the warning beneath it. I folded my arms. I did not know singing was prohibited. That song is not something people accidentally know. Apparently people in my family do. Nathaniel finally looked directly at me. His eyes were gray, colder than his father's, and far too observant. Tell me about your grandmother. Why? Because my father just said her name after 11 years of silence. That does not give you permission to interrogate me. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. People probably did not tell Nathaniel Sullivan no very often. I asked you a question, and I asked why. Behind him, Walter made a soft sound. We both turned. His hand rested against his chest, not in pain, but over his heart. Evelyn, he whispered again. Nathaniel's composure cracked for half a second. Dad. Walter looked at him, but said nothing. The silence returned so completely that I could hear rain running through the gutters outside. Nathaniel crouched beside his father. Can you say my name? Walter's eyes moved to his son. His lips parted. Nothing came out. I watched Nathaniel straighten, and for the first time I saw something beneath the power everyone seemed to fear. Hurt. Old hurt. He buried it almost immediately. Mrs. Holloway, he called. She appeared in the doorway within seconds. Call Dr. Bennett. Tell him my father spoke. Then Nathaniel looked at me. You stay? I am off in 20 minutes. You will be paid. That is not the point. His jaw tightened. What is the point, Miss Carter? That I am an employee, not evidence. Walter's eyes shifted toward me again. I softened my voice. My grandmother raised me in Milwaukee. Her name was Evelyn Carter. She died 6 years ago. She sang that song when I was little. That is everything I know. Nathaniel studied me. Did she ever mention the Sullivan family? No, Chicago. Sometimes. She lived here when she was younger. That got his attention. Where? I do not know. She did not talk much about those years. Walter suddenly reached toward the side table. His fingers searched beneath a stack of old newspapers until he found a small writing pad. Mrs. Holloway stared as he picked up a pen. His hand shook slightly while he wrote one word. He turned the pad toward me. Evelyn. Beneath it, he drew a short line and wrote another word. Garden. What does that mean? I asked. Walter looked toward the dark windows. Nathaniel followed his gaze. My mother's garden, he said quietly. It has been locked since she died. Was your mother Margaret? Nathaniel looked at me sharply. Yes. The name settled over the room differently now. Not a lyric. A person. Walter pushed himself to his feet. Mrs. Holloway moved to help him, but he shook his head. He walked slowly toward me and held out his hand. I stared at it. What does he want? Nathaniel asked. Walter pointed toward me, then toward the hallway leading to the back of the estate. I think he wants me to follow him. Nathaniel's expression hardened. Absolutely not. Walter turned toward his son. For several seconds, father and son stared at each other. Then Walter lifted the writing pad again and wrote 3 words with deliberate strokes. Let her come. Walter's request changed something Nathaniel's authority could not. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Nathaniel looked at the writing pad, looked at me, and stepped aside. 5 minutes, he said. Your father is the one inviting me. And this is my house. Then congratulations on owning a house where nobody listens to you. Mrs. Holloway made a sound that might have been a cough. Nathaniel stared at me, clearly deciding whether I was brave or simply terrible at keeping a job. Walter almost smiled. That settled it. He walked into the hallway, and I followed. Nathaniel came behind us. We crossed the rear corridor toward a pair of French doors I had never seen opened. Walter stopped before them and held out his hand. Nathaniel removed an old brass key from a nearby cabinet. He has not asked to come out here since my mother died, he said quietly. The lock turned with a heavy click. Cold evening air drifted inside, carrying the smell of wet earth and cedar. Beyond the doors was a garden hidden behind tall hedges. Moonlight touched an empty fountain, stone benches, and rose bushes that had grown wild around wooden trellises. Walter stepped outside. His shoulders seemed to lower. I stayed several feet behind him. This was Margaret's? I asked. Nathaniel nodded. She designed it. Walter walked toward a covered bench beneath an old maple tree. He reached behind the bench and pulled free a small metal box darkened by age. Nathaniel immediately moved closer. What is that? Walter ignored him. He brought the box to me. I think he wants you to open it, I said. Nathaniel gave me a dry look. I gathered that. The box was not locked. Inside were photographs, pressed flowers, and folded recipe cards tied with a faded green ribbon. Walter selected one photograph and placed it in my hand. 3 people stood in this same garden, younger by decades. Walter was easy to recognize. Beside him stood a blonde woman with a bright smile. Margaret, I assumed. The third woman made my breath catch. Dark auburn hair, round glasses, a familiar crooked smile. That is my grandmother. Nathaniel took the photograph from me. Evelyn. Yes. I pointed to the small pendant around her neck. She wore that necklace every day until she died. Nathaniel turned the picture over. Nothing was written on the back. Walter tapped Evelyn's face, then pointed at me. I look like her, I said. He nodded. Nathaniel's suspicion returned instantly. You said she never mentioned us. She did not. Yet she was standing in my mother's garden. I can see that. And she taught you my mother's song. Apparently. His voice sharpened. You expect me to believe you knew nothing? I handed the photograph back. I expect you to believe I am telling you the truth. That is not the same thing. I took a slow breath. If you want me to help your father, stop treating me like I broke into your family. Nathaniel went silent. I did not ask for this. I continued. I came here to work. Your father heard a song. He recognized my grandmother's name. Whatever happened before I was born belongs to your family and mine, but I will not stand here and be accused because the adults in our lives kept secrets. Walter reached for my hand. His fingers were cool and careful. Then he looked directly at Nathaniel. For a moment, I thought he might speak again. Instead, he returned to the metal box and removed a yellowed envelope. One word was written across the front in my grandmother's handwriting. Walter opened his writing pad and wrote beneath it. Find. Nathaniel read the envelope aloud. Evelyn. Walter shook his head and pointed to the empty envelope. Then he wrote 2 more words. Letter missing. Nathaniel's face changed. There was a letter? Walter nodded. I looked at the photographs, the old garden, and the empty envelope that had waited 11 years to be opened. Nathaniel looked at me differently now. Not with trust. Not yet. But with the first crack in his certainty. Walter wrote one final word and underlined it twice. Daniel. Daniel. Walter had underlined the name so hard the pen nearly tore through the paper. Nathaniel stared at it for several seconds before taking out his phone. Who is Daniel? I asked. Daniel Cross. He has advised my family for almost 30 years. And your father thinks he knows where the letter is? Apparently. Nathaniel called him. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. Walter closed the metal box and held it against his chest. Whatever strength had carried him into the garden seemed to disappear all at once. We should take him inside, I said. Nathaniel looked ready to argue, then noticed his father's face and nodded. Back in the library, Walter refused Mrs. Holloway's help and settled into his usual chair. I brought him tea without asking. He watched me place it beside him, then tapped the empty chair across from his. You want me to stay? He nodded. Nathaniel remained near the fireplace. You were supposed to be off work. Your father disagrees. My father has communicated more preferences tonight than he has in 11 years. There was no irritation in his voice this time, only disbelief. Walter reached for the writing pad. His hand moved slowly. Sing. I swallowed. The same song. He nodded. I looked at Nathaniel. Do not look at me, he said. He clearly outranks me now. I almost smiled. Then I sang quietly, the way Evelyn used to sing while stirring soup on Sunday afternoons. Walter closed his eyes. His breathing steadied. When I reached Margaret's name, his fingers tightened around the teacup, but he did not retreat into himself. He listened until the final note disappeared. Then he opened his eyes and wrote another word. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. I asked. He pointed toward the garden. You want to go back? A nod. Nathaniel stepped closer. Dad, you have avoided that garden for 11 years. Walter looked at him and wrote carefully. Ready. Nathaniel read the word twice. Something softened in his face. All right. The next morning, I arrived at 7:30 expecting the house to have returned to its usual silence. Instead, Walter was waiting near the French doors wearing a navy cardigan and holding the brass key. Nathaniel stood beside him with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me. Peace offering? I asked. Temporary ceasefire. Progress. Outside, morning sunlight made the neglected garden look less haunted. Walter led us to a row of rose bushes near the fountain and began removing dead leaves with his bare hands. I found gardening gloves in an old cabinet and joined him. Nathaniel surprised me by doing the same. For almost an hour, we worked without discussing missing letters or family secrets. Walter showed me where Margaret had planted lavender. I cleared weeds from the stone path. Nathaniel repaired a loose wooden trellis with tools from the shed. For the first time, the estate did not feel like a monument to people who had stopped living. It felt like a home remembering how to breathe. When Walter became tired, we sat beneath the maple tree. He pointed toward a patch of bare soil and wrote one word. Daisies. Margaret liked daisies? I asked. He nodded. So did Evelyn, I said. Walter looked at me and smiled. Nathaniel saw it too. His expression changed in a way I could not name. He likes having you here, he said quietly. I like being here with him. That was not what I expected. You expected me to be dangerous. I expected you to have an explanation. I brushed soil from my gloves. Maybe not everything begins with an explanation. Walter suddenly reached into his cardigan pocket and handed me a folded photograph I had not seen the night before. It showed Margaret and Evelyn standing beside the fountain, laughing. Behind them stood a younger Daniel Cross. On the back, written in Margaret's handwriting, was a date from exactly 11 years earlier and 6 words that made Nathaniel go completely still. Daniel knows what happened that night. Those 6 words stayed with me long after Nathaniel folded the photograph and slipped it into his coat pocket. Daniel knows what happened that night. I wanted to ask what night Margaret meant, but Walter had already turned back toward the garden, his expression distant. Nathaniel did not push him. That surprised me. A week earlier, I would have expected him to demand answers from everyone in the room. Instead, he picked up the gardening shears and quietly returned to the roses. Over the next several days, the garden became our strange little routine. Walter waited for me every morning at 7:30. Sometimes we worked for an hour. Sometimes he simply sat beneath the maple tree while I cleared weeds and talked about ordinary things. Grocery prices, Chicago weather, the terrible coffee in the staff kitchen. He rarely spoke, but he started writing more. Margaret loved yellow roses. Evelyn hated cold weather. Nathaniel broke 3 windows playing baseball when he was 9. That last one made me laugh so hard I nearly dropped the watering can. 3? I asked. Walter smiled and held up 4 fingers. 4. A quiet sound escaped him. It took me a second to realize it was a laugh. I turned and found Nathaniel standing near the French doors. He had heard it too. His face went still. He used to laugh like that, Nathaniel said later while helping me carry a bag of potting soil from the shed. Before my mother died. You remember? Everything about that year. His answer was too quick. I looked at him. Without the charcoal suits and men waiting for instructions, he seemed younger somehow. Still guarded. Still powerful. But here, with dirt on his hands and sunlight catching his dark hair, I could finally see the sun beneath the Mafia boss. You were 24? I said. Yes. And then your mother died and your father stopped speaking. Nathaniel set the bag down. Within days. Did the doctors know why? Physically, there was nothing preventing him from speaking. They called it a trauma response. Grief. Eventually, everyone stopped expecting an answer. Including you? His eyes moved toward Walter. Especially me. There was something in those 2 words that made my chest ache. Before I could respond, Walter tapped the table behind us. He had written Nathaniel on the pad. Nathaniel saw his name and immediately stepped closer. Dad. Walter looked directly at him. His mouth opened. Nothing came. Nathaniel waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then Walter lowered his eyes and crossed the name out. Nathaniel turned away before his father could see his face. I followed him toward the fountain. Do not, he said. Do not what? Tell me he is trying. He is. That does not make 11 years disappear. No, but maybe it makes tomorrow different. Nathaniel looked at me then, and for once there was no suspicion in his eyes. Only exhaustion. How do you do that? Do what? Walk into a room full of things nobody wants to talk about, and somehow make them feel less heavy. I smiled faintly. Years of cleaning other people's messes. He laughed once under his breath. The sound was softer than I expected. Behind us, Walter tapped the table again. This time he pointed toward the house. We followed him into the library, where he went directly to an old cabinet and removed a wooden music box. He placed it in my hands. Inside was a photograph of Margaret, Evelyn, and Daniel, along with a folded piece of paper. My pulse quickened. It was not the missing letter. It was a receipt from a private mailbox in downtown Chicago, dated 11 years earlier. On the back, Evelyn had written a message. If Walter never receives my letter, ask Daniel why. Nathaniel read it over my shoulder. The warmth disappeared from his face. His phone rang before either of us could speak. He looked at the screen. Daniel. Nathaniel stared at Daniel's name on the screen for 2 full rings before answering. Where are you? His voice had changed. The man who had spent the morning carrying potting soil was gone, replaced by the one who made entire rooms careful. I could not hear Daniel's response, but Nathaniel's eyes moved toward Walter. Come to the house. Now. He ended the call. Walter sat beside the music box, watching his son with an expression I could not read. He is coming? I asked. 20 minutes. Nathaniel picked up Evelyn's note again. You should leave. Why? Because this is a family matter. I felt something inside me harden. My grandmother wrote that message. Emily. Do not Emily me like I am suddenly inconvenient. His jaw tightened. I am trying to keep you out of something that may have nothing to do with you. It already has something to do with me. Walter tapped the table once and pointed at the chair beside him. Nathaniel exhaled. Apparently, I have been overruled again. I sat. Daniel arrived 19 minutes later. He was tall, silver-haired, and dressed like a man who had spent decades making difficult conversations look ordinary. The moment he entered the library and saw me beside Walter, he stopped. Not dramatically, just one small hesitation. But Nathaniel noticed. So did I. You know who she is, Nathaniel said. Daniel removed his coat slowly. I know who she resembles. Her grandmother? Daniel looked at me. Evelyn Carter. Hearing my grandmother's name from a stranger made my skin go cold. How did you know her? I asked. Daniel's gaze shifted to Walter. She was Margaret's closest friend. Then why did my grandmother never mention this family? Because she made a promise. Nathaniel placed the mailbox receipt on the table. Did that promise include sending my father a letter? Daniel went still. Walter's fingers curled around the edge of his writing pad. Where is it? Nathaniel asked. Daniel did not answer. Daniel. I kept it. The words seemed to remove all the air from the room. Walter closed his eyes. I looked at him, then back at Daniel. For 11 years? Yes. Why? Daniel sat across from us, suddenly looking older than when he entered. Because Evelyn wrote something she believed Walter needed to know after Margaret died. I believed the truth would destroy what remained of this family. Nathaniel laughed once, without humor. So you decided for us. I thought I was protecting you. Everyone in this house seems very interested in protection when they mean control. I had never heard Nathaniel sound so much like me. Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges. Walter stared at it. His breathing changed. You carried it with you? I asked. For years. Daniel placed it on the table. My grandmother's handwriting covered the front. For Walter Sullivan. Personal. Nathaniel reached for it, but Walter placed his hand over the envelope first. Then he pointed at me. You want me to open it? I asked. Walter nodded. Nathaniel looked at his father. Dad, are you sure? Another nod. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside were 4 handwritten pages. I recognized Evelyn's looping script immediately. I began reading silently, but Walter tapped the table and pointed toward my mouth. Out loud. He nodded. I swallowed and started. Walter, if you are reading this, then I failed to say these words when they mattered most. Margaret did not want Nathaniel to spend the rest of his life believing the story everyone agreed to tell him. Nathaniel became completely still. I looked up. What story? Daniel lowered his eyes. Walter's face crumpled with a grief so old it seemed carved into him. I returned to the letter. The next sentence made my voice catch. Nathaniel deserves to know what really happened to his mother. The sentence seemed to divide Nathaniel's life into everything before it and everything after. He stared at the letter in my hands. Keep reading. I looked at Walter first. His eyes were closed, but he nodded. I continued. Margaret knew her heart condition had become worse. She also knew Nathaniel would blame himself because he canceled his trip that night and came home after she called him. Nathaniel's face lost color. No, Daniel looked down. I kept reading. She did not call him because she was afraid. She called because she wanted to hear her son's voice. Walter, you promised her you would tell him that. My throat tightened. Nathaniel turned toward his father. You told me she did not call. Walter opened his eyes. You said I imagined seeing her number. Walter's hand trembled as he reached for the writing pad. He wrote slowly. I lied. Nathaniel stepped backward. Why? Walter stared at those two words for a long time. Then he wrote again. Protect you. Nathaniel gave a bitter laugh. From what? Walter pressed the pen harder. Guilt. I looked at the remaining pages. Evelyn's letter explained what the Sullivan family had apparently buried beneath 11 years of silence. Margaret had known she was seriously ill. She had hidden how frightened she was because Nathaniel was 24 and already carrying responsibilities she believed were too heavy for him. On her final evening at home, she called him because she wanted to hear him laugh. Nathaniel missed the call during a meeting. By the time he returned it, Walter had already taken Margaret to the hospital. After she died, Nathaniel convinced himself that answering that call might somehow have changed everything. Walter tried to protect his son by denying that Margaret had called at all. It only made the guilt worse. And Daniel? I asked. Evelyn's letter answered that too. Daniel had convinced Walter that the truth would reopen Nathaniel's grief and weaken the family at a dangerous moment. So they kept silent. First about the call, then about Margaret's final wishes. Eventually Walter's grief became something he could not cross. Doctors found no physical reason he could not speak, but every attempt brought him back to the promise he had broken. You stopped speaking because of this? Nathaniel asked. Walter looked at his son. His lips moved. No sound came. Then he nodded. Nathaniel turned toward the window. 11 years. His voice was barely audible. I spent 11 years thinking my mother died, believing I ignored her. Walter stood. He took one step toward him, then stopped. Nathaniel did not turn around. Why did Evelyn know everything? I asked softly. Daniel answered. Margaret told her. They had been friends since college. Evelyn was the one person Margaret trusted to make sure the truth eventually reached Nathaniel. I looked at my grandmother's handwriting. Suddenly her old song made sense. It had never belonged to my family alone. And the song? Daniel glanced at Walter. Margaret and Evelyn wrote it together when they were young. They used to sing it in the garden. Walter looked at me, and I finally understood what had happened that first night. He had not mistaken me for Margaret. He had heard a memory he believed was gone. My voice had carried Evelyn's melody back into a room where grief had been sitting for 11 years. Nathaniel finally turned around. His eyes met his father's. Say it, he whispered. Walter's face tightened. Say my name. Walter tried. His mouth formed the first sound, but nothing followed. Nathaniel looked away. I folded Evelyn's letter carefully. Maybe he cannot give you 11 years back tonight. Nathaniel's eyes moved to me. But he is standing here trying. Walter reached for the pad. This time he wrote only one sentence. I was afraid my voice would tell him the truth. Nathaniel read it. Then he looked at his father. It just did. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Daniel quietly excused himself, leaving Evelyn's letter on the table, as though even he understood that the room belonged to the Sullivan family now. I started toward the door too, but Nathaniel stopped me. Emily. I turned. Stay. It was not an order this time. That should have mattered more than it did. Walter sat down and reached for his writing pad, but Nathaniel placed his hand over it. Not tonight, Dad. Walter looked confused. You do not have to explain everything tonight. Something softened in Walter's face. I watched father and son sit across from each other with 11 years between them and wondered how many families mistook silence for peace simply because nobody was arguing. The next morning, Nathaniel found me in the garden. Daniel told me you read the entire letter before I came downstairs. I stopped trimming the dead leaves from Margaret's roses. Walter asked me to. You knew what it said before I did. For about 20 minutes. And you said nothing. His tone had changed. Cold again. Controlled again. I set the shears on the bench. Your father wanted to tell you himself. You could have warned me. Warned you about what? That your mother loved you? That your father made a terrible decision because he thought he was protecting you? That Daniel had been lying to me for 11 years. I stared at him. So this is my fault now? I did not say that. You did not have to. He looked away, but I was already tired of watching fear disguise itself as authority. You trusted me when your father needed me. You trusted me when I helped open the garden. You trusted me when I read my grandmother's letter. But the second the truth hurts, I become suspicious again. Emily, you do not understand my world. No, I understand it perfectly. Everyone keeps secrets, calls it protection, and then acts surprised when nobody trusts anyone. His jaw tightened. Be careful. I almost laughed. There it is. What? The man everyone warned me about. I removed my gardening gloves. Your father found his voice. Maybe it is time you learned how to listen. Nathaniel went completely still. What are you saying? I am saying I quit. For the first time since I had met him, Nathaniel looked genuinely unprepared. Because we argued? Because I will not spend my life proving I am innocent every time you become afraid of being betrayed. I walked past him before my courage could fail. Mrs. Holloway helped me collect my things without asking questions. Walter found us near the staff entrance. He looked at the small bag in my hand, then at me. His face fell. I am sorry, I whispered. You did nothing wrong. Walter reached for his pad, but I gently closed it. You do not need to explain. His eyes moved toward the hallway behind me. Nathaniel stood there, silent. I hugged Walter carefully. Keep going into the garden. His fingers tightened around mine. Then I stepped away. Nathaniel did not stop me. That hurt more than I expected. I reached the front door when Walter's chair scraped softly behind me. I turned. He was standing in the center of the hall, looking past me at his son. His lips trembled. Nathaniel took one step forward. Dad, Walter drew a breath. 11 years of grief seemed to gather inside that single moment. Then his voice came, rough but unmistakable. Nathaniel. Nobody moved. Nathaniel's face changed completely. Dad. Walter swallowed and spoke again, stronger this time. Listen. Nathaniel looked at his father. Walter pointed toward me. Do not lose her because you are afraid of the truth. Walter's words followed me all the way home. Do not lose her because you are afraid of the truth. I expected Nathaniel to appear that evening. He did not. I expected a phone call the next morning. Nothing. 3 days passed before someone knocked on the door of my small apartment outside Milwaukee. When I opened it, Nathaniel stood alone on the landing. No driver. No men in dark suits. No expensive car waiting at the curb. Just Nathaniel in a navy coat, holding a paper bag from the bakery 2 blocks away. How did you find my apartment? I asked. He paused. Mrs. Holloway gave me the address after I promised not to behave like myself. I almost smiled. That sounds like her. He held out the bag. Cinnamon rolls. Is this how Mafia bosses apologize? I would not know. I have never been particularly good at apologizing. I noticed. He accepted that without argument. May I come in? I stepped aside. He entered my tiny living room and looked strangely out of place beside my thrift store coffee table and crooked bookshelf. How is Walter? I asked. Nathaniel's expression softened. Talking. My heart lifted. Really? Not constantly. A few sentences at a time. Dr. Bennett says we should not pressure him. He looked down at his hands. Yesterday he told me about the day I was born. I could hear what that meant beneath the words. How did that feel? Like getting part of my father back. I nodded. I am glad. Silence settled between us. Then Nathaniel looked at me. I was wrong. No excuse followed. I spent years believing suspicion kept people safe. My father believed silence kept me safe. Daniel believed secrets kept our family safe. He shook his head. We were all just afraid in different ways. And now I am trying something else. What? The truth. He took a breath. I trusted you until trusting you required me to be vulnerable. Then I punished you for knowing something I was afraid to hear. You did not deserve that. My anger did not disappear, but something inside it loosened. I am not coming back because you apologized. I know. And I will not work in a house where I am treated like a suspect. You will not. That sounded dangerously close to a promise. It is one. I studied him. What exactly are you asking for? Nothing today. That surprised me. I came to apologize, not to collect forgiveness. He left 10 minutes later. No pressure. No command. 2 weeks passed before I visited Walter. I did not return as a maid. I returned because he had become my friend. The garden looked different. The paths were cleared. Fresh daisies bordered the fountain. Walter sat beneath the maple tree with Nathaniel beside him. Emily, Walter said when he saw me. Hearing my name in his voice nearly stopped me where I stood. Look at you, I whispered. Showing off now. Walter laughed. Nathaniel did too. I sat beside them, and Walter handed me Evelyn's old song sheet. Sing, he asked. I smiled. Only if you sing with me. Terrible voice. Then you will fit right in. I began softly. Walter joined for 3 uncertain words before laughing again. Nathaniel watched us, and this time there was no suspicion in his eyes. Months later, I still visited that garden. Nathaniel never asked me to become the maid again. Instead, he asked me to dinner. Then another dinner. Slowly, carefully, without pretending trust could be ordered into existence. Walter kept talking, some days more than others. The song eventually became unnecessary, which might have been the most beautiful part. I had entered the Sullivan house believing my job was to clean rooms nobody noticed. Instead, I found a family buried beneath 11 years of silence. Walter taught me that a voice could return. Nathaniel taught himself that power meant nothing without trust. And somewhere between Margaret's roses and Evelyn's forgotten song, I learned that strength was never about how much silence a person could endure. Sometimes strength was simply having the courage to speak, listen, and stay.